Hello and welcome to IBTimes TV. I'm Leanna Brinder, Business Editor for the International Business Times. Joining me now is Cairns. She's the President of International Markets at MasterCard. So hi, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So kicking off with an idea about the landscape for credit cards. How has technology been shaping it over the last few years, and is cash becoming dead?
Cash is dying very slowly. It's still, paper and cash are still 85% of the world's consumer payments today, and in some of the markets that I manage, the emerging markets, it's up at 97%. So it's dying slowly, though there are tipping points in certain markets. And technology is certainly at the forefront of shaping the whole industry, and I think sometimes the use of the term credit card doesn't really lend itself to that, in that the card parts are dematerialising and moving, of course, to electronic wallets.
On terms of contactless payments, I mean, that's a huge thing maybe in the West. How is that being adopted maybe in emerging markets?
Well, funnily enough, emerging markets are leapfrogging from that point of view. For example, Poland, Eastern Europe, was the fastest growing contactless market in Europe for a number of years, and the reason is because it didn't have the level of infrastructure that you have in other Western European countries. So where you're putting in new infrastructure, you can move to contactless. For example, when you get off a plane in places like South Africa, you'll find that you can just tap and go to get onto the trains.
I mean, when it comes to this type of innovation, of course comes a lot of risks, and cybersecurity, and especially with contactless payments, there's been concerns that there's a huge amount of risks associated with that. So how do companies like MasterCard help try and safeguard consumers from being affected by this?
Well, we take cybersecurity very, very seriously. And of course, we have multiple layers of security in our infrastructure to protect consumers. And we don't necessarily think that moving to electronic or contactless is increasing the risk, by the way. But what we do is we look at new fraud tools, new ways of basically deploying technology so that we keep one step ahead of the curve with that.
Okay, so we talked about Poland, but where else in the emerging markets do you see major growth?
Oh, well, we see major growth all over the world. Obviously, Asia, Southeast Asia is growing very fast. We see big growth in the Middle East and Africa. We're seeing growth across various parts of Latin America. Brazil actually is our biggest country outside of North America. So all of the emerging markets are growing at double-digit growth rates for us. But interestingly, Europe is also growing at double-digit growth rates, so there's plenty to be done here too.
India seems to be growing in terms of their adoption of credit cards. Well, over there they've want to launch RuPay, which is a domestic kind of alternative to Visa and MasterCard. How do you see that as competition from the domestic markets?
You know, all over the world we have domestic players that we work with. For example, we work with China Union Pay in China, and they deal with domestic payments, and then they hook up with us to do cross-border international payments. We actually welcome having people who are opening up markets, because we think once consumers start adopting this kind of technology, there's lots of things that we can do together with domestic players.
Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much too.
And that was Cairns, President of International Markets at MasterCard.